I'm just going through some of the questions that you've asked me to address in this vlog, and one that keeps coming up is the idea of mental strength in climbing, or the flip side of that would be to say the absence of fear when you're climbing, especially in things like trad or alpinism. So Christopher asks, Wolfgang Gulich said that the most important muscle for climbing is the brain. My question to you is, how do you train the brain? How does one become mentally strong? In this episode, I'm going to go through a few of the core concepts related to how I've become mentally strong, relatively speaking, compared to what I used to be. One thing that I want to say right at the top of this episode is my level of mental confidence when I started out climbing was unbelievably low. And I really have come quite a long way in that respect. So one thing that I don't want anyone to think is that I am naturally mentally strong. And let me just give you an example of that. So in my first years of climbing, even though I'd gained within 3 to 4 years quite a good level of physical ability in climbing, I could climb maybe Font 7C, maybe 8A on bolts, which was good for that time. My level in trad climbing was really low, so I could climb severe or VS. And if you know your trad climbing grades, your UK trad climbing grades, you'll know that that's a really quite low level, and that some people who are climbing 5+, 6A on bolts on a climbing wall could achieve that level no problem. And yet I was climbing far higher physical level and I really struggled. Now, what I actually felt when I was doing trad climbs at that time, I just felt like I was soloing. I just felt that I had no confidence that the gear was going to hold me, or had no idea whether it would hold me or not. I was backing off VSs, just getting totally gripped and scared and wondering what was going on. And an interesting thing happened was that it just clicked literally one day, where I think I'd done enough familiarization with gear, how to place it, what determines whether a nut or a cam is actually a good placement that's reliable or not. I'd fiddled around with belays and placed runners and abseiled and done all the things that you have to do when you learn to trad climb, that I suddenly got to that threshold where I could look at a runner that I'd placed and decide that's either really good and it's not coming out, or I'm quite confident in it, even on its own, and with another couple of backups, that's going to be good, or I can't follow on that runner, it's not quite good enough. And when that happened, my trad climbing level in one single day, I did my first HVS, E1, E2, E3, and E4. So that shows you that there was nothing inherent in my mental confidence that was lacking. Mental confidence was not actually the problem. The problem was the absence of the practical skills of being able to look at a piece of gear and decide whether that was really protecting me or it wasn't protecting me. So that's the first point. People often believe that in order to become confident in their climbing, they're going to have to change their brain, they're going to have to change their ability to be bold. But actually, that's often not the case. All you have to change is your practical skills, and you already have within you the ability to be really confident. Another aspect is the idea of falling. Now, the concept of actually falling off a cliff when you're a new climber, or even when you're an experienced climber, is still a difficult thing to get your head around. For good reason, we're hardwired not to want to fall off cliffs. This is healthy, this is normal. And to a certain extent in climbing, we have to overcome that with familiarity. And that's something I go into great detail in my first book, 9 out of 10 Climbers, where I dedicate a whole section of the book to dealing with how you get over fear of falling. And again, that's there, so I'm not going to deal with that in this vlog. So the second major jump in my confidence as a trad climber came purely by accident, and that's actually the case with a lot of steps forward I've made in my climbing. I would love to take the credit for thinking about them and discovering them, but actually I discovered them purely by accident. So this one happened when I got injured. I went through a phase for about 5 years in my 20s where I got finger injury after finger injury. Just one pulley would recover and then another one would injure. And I had maybe 20 pulley injuries over the course of many years in all of my fingers. The reasons why that happened and why I was able to stop that, I will go into in another edition, another episode. But I was very depressed to be injured and out of climbing. I was exasperated, as a young keen climber. I just wanted to do anything to be climbing. And eventually I discovered that I could actually climb if I used a purely open-handed 3-finger drag, so that I wasn't really engaging the A2 pulley at all. Now, I'd only recommend doing that if you have a pulley injury, if you are able to be disciplined enough to maintain that grip type. So that can be very dangerous. You can make your injury a lot worse really quickly if you forget even once and start to crimp. But anyway, that's what I was doing. So I found that I was able to climb, but really at quite a low level. So I really wanted to go outside and do routes. So I thought, how can I make climbing at a much lower level interesting and challenging? So I went right back to the level that I could climb without pain, which in trad climbing grades was VS, which was a really low level for me at that time. I was climbing about E4 at the time on site, no problem. So what I did was I looked in my guidebooks around Scotland and I looked for the scariest sounding VSs that I could find. The ones that sounded either loose or long or exposed or intimidating or often wet or very traditional. And I went for those. And you know, I had a brilliant time. It was one of the best times I've ever had in my climbing life. These were all routes that I would have ignored otherwise if it wasn't for this very specific situation. But when I went to climb them, I just had these amazing days out and really enjoyed them. And then once I'd done maybe around 10 routes of that type, my finger was strong enough to then progress to HVS. And I did exactly the same with HVS and then E1 and then E2 and so on. And by the time my finger was strong enough to get back to my original level of leading E4 on site, I was able to jump straight to E5. And that was actually something I'd been trying to break into for maybe a season or so without any success. But I was able to go straight to that, and then the following year I did around 20 E6s on site and also a few E7s on site. So it really seemed to propel my development as a trad climber right through. Now some of that would have been the practical skills, placing the gear, gaining the endurance, gaining the ability to rest, gaining the ability to read the rock, gaining experience in lots of different rock types. And those things underpinned my confidence. I became a better leader. I became a solid leader, and I just wasn't that before. I didn't have that breadth of experience on different routes. But crucially, not just going out and doing route after route after route. There's something different here. It was the type of route that I was doing. Although I was climbing at a lower grade, I was trying to step out of my comfort zone deliberately and do routes that I would otherwise find worrying or challenging. And that's a key thing. There's a lot of climbers that I know, that I observe, that don't progress very well in their trad climbing, despite the fact that they go out and do a lot of routes and do a lot of volume. But those routes are all similar in nature. They're all routes that they know they're quite capable of. So this was really a brilliant experience for me. I turned what was a very depressing situation, not really being able to climb properly, into something that progressed my climbing from a plateau right through to a much higher level than I could have actually imagined. I started out as an E4 leader and finished up as an E7 leader despite being injured. That's a pretty good win. So I think there's something to be said for looking in the guidebook, or perhaps looking in the guidebook to see what's not in the guidebook, to go and try a new route, or even leaving the guidebook at home and just going to the cliff and looking for the thing that maybe intimidates you a bit but is at a lower difficulty level, and going for that and really broadening your skills as a leader. Because there's like your level of boldness and you're trying to increase that, but if you increase your level of experience and ability to deal with any type of climbing terrain, you're actually reducing the level of boldness that you need to have, because you don't need to step outside of your skill level. You don't need to be so committed when you find a runner that you wouldn't have otherwise found if you were less experienced, or you're able to downclimb from a situation that before you would never have been able to downclimb from. Even if you don't actually downclimb, just knowing that you could if you needed to reduces that feeling of commitment and therefore fear. So all these things play into your confidence. And the third major jump in my mental performance in climbing relates to positive thinking, or rather the lack of it. So I studied sports science at university with a fair bit of sports psychology, and the standard thinking in the field at that time was that thinking positively causes good performance. Now, this is a major problem in the whole of science, is the attribution of causality and sometimes misattributing the direction of causality. I'll maybe go through that in other fields in future episodes. But this is a classic example, I think. So there was an observation in the science that thinking positively and good performance were associated, they travel together. And then there was a jump, an assumption that the positive thinking caused the good performance. And I took that on board, downloaded it with all the other advice that I was learning at the time, and tried to weave it into my own practice as a climber. I tried to say, I can do these routes, I am capable of doing it. And there was a bit of a hollowness about that, I've got to admit.
You can climb E11. You are as bold as Alex Honnold. You are a bold climber. You will not be scared. It's just ridiculous, man.
A lot of times I didn't feel that I was up to the standards necessary to climb my project climbs. And there's also the nagging feeling in your mind that if you do this project climb, you're just going to try a harder one tomorrow. So if you think, I'm good enough to do this climb, well, okay, you may be, but then tomorrow you're going to try a harder one and a harder one and a harder one until you meet your limit. So it's not really a scalable technique to use in many ways. To think about it in a different way, if you're sure that you're capable of the goal that you're trying to do, then maybe it's too easy. You know, that doubt of whether it's actually possible or not, to me, is what makes climbing interesting and what makes doing hard projects and hard new routes interesting. You have to feel like maybe you can't do it. Otherwise, why are you bothering? On many routes, especially many bold trad routes, I would feel anything but positive. I would be stood at the start of them or actually climbing up them thinking, I'm not fit enough. The conditions are rubbish. It's too greasy. I made a mistake. I fluffed my footwork. I placed the gear wrong. I forgot the gear. I was human. I was making lots of mistakes and I was feeling bad about that. I'm feeling, I shouldn't be here on this E9. You know, I'm not good enough for this. And those thoughts were going round and round in my head as I was climbing hard routes. And yet I would get to the top of them and I would go, oh, well, that was lucky. I wasn't really in a good mental frame of mind there, and I still managed to climb the route. That was a fluke. But when that happens again and again and again over years, after a decade or so, you start to think, maybe I should revisit the initial idea and think, is this really correct? Is it really a necessary prerequisite to have positive thinking and to be positively, in a good positive mental state before you make the good performance? How I look back on my climbing was quite different. It was, regardless of whether I felt in a positive or negative mental state, I would just do the climb anyway. And in fact, what I started to realize was that the times that I felt positive were when I had climbed well. So the direction of causality is in the opposite direction. A good performance causes positive thinking, not the other way around. And once I started to think about it in this way, then I started to not worry nearly so much about my frame of mind, and I started to refocus my concentration back onto the practical tasks, like what was actually going to make the difference between success or failure on the climb. So all of the mental aspects of how I felt, I took them as being secondary to what was actually happening in the real world around me. Did I have the moves wired? Had I read the route from the ground? Was I in good physical shape? Were my fingers strong enough? Was I fit enough? Were the conditions right? And if these things weren't right and I wasn't able to achieve my goal climbs, I wouldn't beat myself up about that anymore. Instead, I would just go and fix them and come back and do the route. To pick another example from bold trad climbing, there's a very famous E9 called the Indian Face in Wales. When I first went to go and try it, it was just the wrong time of year, and I only realised that when I was there. I went down there in May, early in the trad climbing season. I just spent the whole winter bouldering at 45 degrees with not a lot of weight on my feet. And then I spent the whole spring trying a 70 degrees overhanging 8C Plus project and done that. And then I went down to Wales and I started to try and climb a 120 foot slab. And I found that I was just getting sore feet. My feet were weak and didn't have enough endurance to stand on the holds for the length of time I needed to climb the pitch. And I pretty quickly decided that it wasn't the right time to try the route. Now, I inevitably went home feeling like, well, I failed on it. And I was thinking, well, am I confident enough? Do I have what's needed to do this climb? I didn't actually come back to the climb that season, but when I did come back a year or 2 years later, I just made sure that I did a right good bunch of trad routes in a couple of months beforehand so that I had good endurance in my feet for climbing slabs. My feet have always been quite weak. I came back and I had absolutely no problem. And when I was on that Crocs of Indian Face, I really didn't feel very scared at all. I was definitely very keyed up. In fact, I would say that I was trying to make myself more scared, because being in a place like that, the Crocs of the Indian Face, where it is dangerous, like you can't afford to fall off, and you know, it only takes 1 foot slip for you to fall off. So it's not the place to relax too much. You want to have a bit of fear, but experience allows you to have a bit of fear and not break down. And that comes back to what I was saying about being a solid leader. You're able to handle a fair bit more fear without your performance collapsing, without everything just going and your footwork disappears and you start to get gripped and you hold on really hard and you start to wobble and then maybe you fall. When you're a solid leader and you felt fear to a moderate degree many times, you think, this is what I'm expecting. This is the Crocs of the Indian Face. I'm going to feel a bit scared. I'm going to think, is my foot going to stay on that hold? And that's a good thing to think, because you should worry if your foot's going to stay on that hold or not. So I guess you could say the fear is not really diminished, it's just that your ability to tolerate it is increased. But actually I think it's a bit of both. I think because there are fewer unknowns, fear is all about the unknown, and the more unknowns you're eliminating, the less fear you actually feel. So unknowns could be when you start to get pumped and if you don't know whether you've got 5 moves left in your arms or 25 moves, then naturally your mind assumes it's 5 moves, and so you get terrified and even more gripped. But when you eliminate that unknown through experience, you can get a bit of pump in your arms and go, this is okay, I've got enough to get to the next good hold, and then I can shake out a bit. So those are 3 jumps in my climbing performance with respect to mental strength that I made in my own life. As I say, there's more related to falling and fear of falling in my book, and I will go through other details related to mental strength in future episodes. In fact, in the next episode, I'm going to answer a question about the most scared that I've ever been in climbing, which was very scared. To me now, if you feel like you have worries about whether you're mentally confident enough to do the climbs that are your goals, that's a signal that you've actually set a good, worthwhile goal that will push what you're able to do and force you to make changes in your routine that allow you to increase your level. In fact, I would say that the moment you're not feeling that uncertainty and that fear is the moment you're going backwards in your climbing. Thank you for all the feedback you've sent me on my vlog so far. I'm glad that the episodes have been useful, and I'll try and continue to make as many as possible. Do remember, if you haven't done so yet, to subscribe to my channel, and maybe you would consider liking the videos as well so that more people will get to see them. Okay, thank you, and see you in the next episode.